In Russia, things are different. Criticize the government, you might find yourself in handcuffs. Speak out against President Vladimir Putin, you could end up behind bars, or worse. In Russia, independent journalists just vanish. Opposition leaders are imprisoned. The government silences critics with an iron fist and strict media control. That's why what's happening right now in Russia is shocking. Criticism of Putin is being broadcast on state-controlled national TV, and not just by any random dissenter, but by one of his own confidants, a staunch propagandist for the Russian government who is calling for Putin to resign. And surprisingly, he's not the only one doing so. So is it finally happening? Are Russians finally seeing through Putin's lies? And does this mean his days are numbered? Stay tuned to get the answers. First, what exactly happened on Russia's biggest TV show? Imagine this, you're watching Channel 1 Russia, the most influential state-controlled television network in your country, and right there, on air, one of Putin's closest allies, Vladimir Solovyov, drops a bombshell. Now, Solovyov isn't just any TV host, he's the host, Putin's mouthpiece. The man awarded the prestigious Order of Honor from Putin himself in 2013. He's a fierce supporter of Russia's war in Ukraine. If there's anyone you'd think would never speak out of line, it's Solovyov. But then on September 22, 2024, a Sunday night, the unthinkable happens. Solovyov goes off script. He's talking about the Ukrainian attacks near Russia's western borders, calls them terrorist attacks. He's fired up, he's demanding action, and then, out of nowhere, he says it. A resignation is necessary. Did Solovyov just suggest that someone, likely Putin himself, needs to resign? You can practically hear the air get sucked out of the room. His co-hosts are stunned. There's even what appears to be an audible gasp in the background. The awkwardness is palpable. And remember, this isn't just any throwaway comment. It's on state TV, which Putin controls. That's like a news anchor in North Korea suggesting Kim Jong-un stepped down. It just doesn't happen. Yet it did. But here's where things get murky. Some people say it's a misunderstanding. Solovyov used the word ostavka, which translates to resignation, but others claim he meant stavka, an old military term referring to the Supreme Commander's headquarters. But let's be real. The audience heard resignation. His co-hosts heard resignation. And everyone was taken aback. You don't just casually say resignation on Russian state TV without making waves. Even if this was a slip-up or a cleverly veiled comment, this was huge. Especially when you consider the fact that this wasn't the first time Solovyov said something inflammatory. During another recent broadcast, he went on a strange tangent. He painted a hypothetical scenario, Russia losing its leader. He didn't name Putin directly, but everyone knew who he meant, and then he calmly declared that Russia's political system would survive it. Let that sink in. Here's someone who's been Putin's loudest cheerleader for years, and now he's casually mentioning the possibility of Russia without him. The continuity of government in Russia is guaranteed, Solovyov said, as if it were no big deal. According to him, an entire generation of highly professional and patriotic leaders are ready to step up if the worst happens. But what worst-case scenario is he alluding to? Solovyov appears to be talking about the death or removal of Putin like it's a natural part of the conversation. It's bizarre. You don't throw out the idea of Putin stepping down, or worse, without raising eyebrows. Not in Putin's Russia. It's almost as if Solovyov is subtly preparing the public for a post-Putin Russia, while reassuring them that everything will be fine. And it doesn't stop there. In another jaw-dropping moment, Solovyov challenged Putin's nuclear doctrine. Now, this is the same doctrine that outlines the terrifying circumstances under which Russia would use nuclear weapons. And here's Solovyov questioning why Russia isn't retaliating against Ukraine with nukes for strikes on Russian soil. Was Solovyov just venting his frustration? Or was it another subtle critique of Putin's leadership disguised as a debate over military policy? Put all of this together and you have to wonder what's really going on here. Is Solovyov just slipping up, or is this part of something bigger, a shift in the narrative? Because whether he's suggesting Putin's resignation, speculating about his demise, or pushing for a more aggressive military stance, it signals one thing: cracks are starting to show in Putin's once rock-solid foundation. Now, if you're watching this video from a typical democratic country, all this might sound like a strange soap opera, like something that belongs in the realm of satire or fiction. After all, in a democracy, politicians and leaders get criticized on live television every day, often in much harsher terms. A slip of the tongue or some open speculation about a leader's downfall wouldn't even make the front page. But we aren't talking about a democracy. We're talking about Russia, where the political landscape operates under an entirely different set of rules, where free speech comes at a perilous cost. That's why you shouldn't be quick to dismiss Solovyov's remarks as just Russian melodrama. You see, in Russia, the media isn't free. Far from it. Since Putin came to power in 2000, and especially since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Russian media landscape has been crushed under state control. Independent news outlets have been systematically shut down. Channels and newspapers that dared to criticize Putin or report on anything contrary to the official narrative were forced to close or face harsh consequences. For instance, just after the Ukrainian invasion, long-standing independent outlets like Novaya Gazeta, one of Russia's few remaining independent newspapers, was stripped of its media license and in effect banned from operating. Radio Echo Moskvy was shut down, and TV Rain, another major independent broadcaster, was forced off the air. Even online platforms weren't spared. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram were blocked, making it impossible for regular Russians to access alternative perspectives. Now, this might seem shocking to you, but for Russia, it's old news. This level of control over the media is nothing but a culmination of a long history of silencing opposition. Granted, Putin certainly took it to a whole new level. Let's talk about examples of what happens when someone tries to break free of his control. Consider the case of Marina Ovsyannikova, a journalist who worked for Channel 1. In July 2022, she took the incredibly brave step of protesting the war in Ukraine on live TV. She stood behind a news anchor holding up a sign that read in Russian, "Putin is a murderer. His soldiers are fascists." The result? She was immediately fired, branded a traitor, and eventually sentenced to 8.5 years in prison in absentia. Ovsyanikova's own family turned against her, with her relatives testifying against her in court. Her ex-husband, a pro-Putin supporter, even managed to get her stripped of custody of her children. But the most chilling part, this is far from the first time a journalist or public figure has faced severe consequences for speaking out, and these are far from the most severe consequences suffered. Let's look at the case of Anna Politkovskaya, the renowned journalist who fearlessly criticized the Putin regime and exposed atrocities during the Chechen wars. In 2006, she was murdered, shot dead in her apartment building in what many believe was a politically motivated assassination. Her killers were convicted, but the masterminds behind her death were never brought to justice, and the list could go on and on. But there's no need to do so, as the message is already clear. Step out of line, and you'll pay the ultimate price. Given the backdrop, a question begs to be answered. Why has one of Putin's most loyal propagandists started making dubious comments, even in passing? Because the war is going horribly for Russia, plain and simple. And now, for the first time, the Russian people are starting to see it too. The staggering casualty numbers are impossible to hide. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, Russia has lost somewhere between 700,000 and 790,000 troops. That's an entire generation of young soldiers shipped home in body bags, gravely injured or missing in action. And now it's worse than ever. The daily number of casualties exceeds 1,500. But the disaster that truly shook Russia to its core, the Kursk invasion. On August 6, 2024, Ukraine did what no one thought possible. It invaded Russian soil. It was a shocking, audacious strike, the likes of which hadn't been seen since the war began. Or ever, really, as this was the first time in history a state with nuclear weapons got invaded. Ukrainian forces stormed into Kursk Oblast, located in western Russia and bordering Ukraine, with tanks, armored vehicles, and 1,000 troops, capturing towns and sending Russian forces scrambling. Within a week, Ukraine controlled about 390 square miles of Russian territory. 28 towns and villages had fallen. This also made Putin the first Russian leader since World War II to get invaded or lose Russian territory. So as you can imagine, this wasn't just a battlefield setback. This was a nightmare for the Kremlin. After all, Putin's regime had spent years painting Russia as an invincible fortress, its borders secure and its military unassailable, and it only took 1,000 invading soldiers to shatter this illusion. Tens of thousands of Russian civilians were forced to flee their homes, with reports suggesting over 200,000 people were evacuated from Kursk and surrounding areas. For many Russians, this was the first time the horrors of war reached their doorsteps, the ones they had largely been shielded from until now. Of course, the Russian state media tried to downplay the invasion, insisting the situation was under control. However, the truth was hard to hide. Reports of significant military losses, chaotic evacuations, and captured Russian soldiers paraded in Ukrainian propaganda videos spread like wildfire across social media and independent outlets. It was as clear as day, the war had come home, something many Russians believed would never happen. This laid bare the disarray within Russia's military command. The worst part, documents recovered from abandoned Russian buildings revealed that Moscow had known about the potential for a Ukrainian incursion as early as 2023, but failed to act on these warnings. Instead, poorly trained and inexperienced conscripts were stationed to defend the border, and we know how this strategy turned out. In just one strike, Ukrainian HIMARS rockets obliterated an entire Russian convoy, one of the deadliest blows Russia has suffered since the war began. With such scenarios in mind, it isn't surprising that the Kursk invasion also triggered a humanitarian crisis. Thousands of Russian civilians were caught in the crossfire, some reportedly abandoned by the government as they fled occupied areas. Over 770 residents went missing, while many others were killed or injured in the fighting. This failure to protect Russian citizens further eroded Putin's credibility, especially among those directly affected. That's why people in the Kursk Oblast also started speaking out against the regime. Displaced residents took to social media and foreign media outlets to express their anger and disillusionment, an extraordinary shift in a nation where dissent is ruthlessly suppressed. "Foreign troops with NATO equipment have entered our land," one woman says in a video from a car park fleeing from her home. "In a few hours, our city was turned to ruins. Our children are afraid to go to sleep." The desperation is palpable. Another villager, clearly agitated, challenges the state media's narrative. "This is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie," he insists. "This allows civilians to die. There are huge, intense battles." His words echo the frustration that many are feeling as they grapple with the realities of the war creeping closer to their homes. A study carried out by Open Minds, a portal dedicated to combating propaganda, confirms this sentiment. The study revealed a significant decline in positive mentions of the war across Russian media. Instead, there are more grievances being voiced against the authorities. Also, fear is rising that another wave of mobilization might be on the horizon, with many recalling the chaotic partial mobilization in September 2022 that prompted a mass exodus to avoid conscription. So lawmakers started scrambling to calm public fears, refuting rumors of new conscription drives, a clear indication that they had recognized the growing unrest among the populace. This change in tone reflects a profound shift in public sentiment, and the Kremlin knows it can't rally the country around an existential threat when its own borders have been breached. Experts are also taking note. "We're seeing videos of local residents being very unhappy about what's going on," says Yaroslava Barbieri, a doctoral researcher at the University of Birmingham specializing in Russia and Ukraine. "Russia is trying to scramble. They're quite unprepared, quite nervous about how to handle this." But no matter how Moscow proceeds, the impact of the Kursk invasion is already evident. Ordinary Russians, previously indifferent or supportive of Putin, are starting to question his ability to protect them. After all, the realization that the war has arrived on their doorstep is quite sobering. As one resident remarked, "We never thought this could happen to us." But the Kursk invasion did more than just crack the once solid support for the Kremlin from within. It also showed the world that Putin's so-called red lines are nothing but big bluffs. This shift in understanding has emboldened not just military strategists, but also ordinary Russians, who are now starting to realize that the Kremlin's bravado is hollow. The invasion has not just brought the war to Russian soil, it has brought to light the true nature of their government's power, or lack thereof. But is this enough? Will the Kursk invasion alone bring Putin down? The answer, while uncertain, is likely no. Yet when you consider the growing pressure points of the economy, politics, and military, the foundations of this regime are undoubtedly beginning to crumble. Let's start with the economy. Simply put, it's a disaster zone, teetering on the edge of collapse. Russia's key interest rate has skyrocketed from 8% to a staggering 21% in just a year. Projections even suggest that it might exceed 25% in the near future. The implications are dire. Lending is drying up, and homebuyers now face interest rates as high as 30%. Many ordinary Russians are deeply indebted, burdened by loans that seem insurmountable. Meanwhile, inflation is running rampant, likely above 9%, while the ruble continues to lose value. And every additional ruble printed for the war effort is a step toward exacerbating the situation. The war in Ukraine is draining resources, continually deepening the financial strain on everyday Russians and turning mere discontent into simmering rage. Yet the economy isn't the only pressure point pushing against Putin's facade of power. Inside the Kremlin, the political landscape is also shifting, and the oligarchs are getting restless. With Putin having turned 72 recently, the reality of his mortality looms large. Factions within the oligarchy are already gearing up for a power struggle, each eyeing the throne that could soon be vacated. But these elites aren't motivated by a desire for democracy. Their goal? Self-preservation. If they find themselves on the losing end of a power struggle, they risk being eliminated by rivals once Putin's grip slips. So what's the smart play? It's to remove Putin before he exits the stage. However, any ploy to oust Putin requires collusion with the military and intelligence services. The good news? Both of these are also increasingly disillusioned and frustrated with the current state of affairs. As far as the military goes, it's the third pressure point that complicates Putin's position. You see, the Russian military is under severe strain, facing not just battlefield losses, but also deepening resentment. Why? Well, because the Kremlin has sidelined military leaders in favor of the FSB, Russia's principal security agency, creating a rift that breeds resentment within the ranks. All it takes is for soldiers grappling with plummeting pride and the humiliation in how they're treated for them to stop fighting or flee when the going gets tough, and the Russian military would collapse. Put all of these pressure points together and you create a situation ripe for change. If the pressure continues to mount, it may not be long before the regime faces an existential crisis of its own making, and it wouldn't be the first crisis it's faced recently. Just look what happened with the Wagner Group rebellion. Without exaggerating, the attempted Wagner rebellion was a seismic event that rattled the very foundations of Putin's regime. On June 23, 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group and Putin's former ally, led a mutiny, moving his forces toward Moscow. At the height of the rebellion, Wagner troops seized Rostov-on-Don, a major military hub, and advanced to within 124 miles of the capital. This audacious advance put Putin's grip on power under a microscope. For the first time in decades, the Russian leader faced an open challenge from within his ranks. The uprising revealed critical flaws in the Kremlin's security apparatus, with border guards failing to halt the march and military generals opting for coffee with Prigozhin instead of defending the state. So why wasn't Prigozhin stopped? After all, a single aerial strike could have halted the march. Reports suggest that the military leaders feared repercussions if they opposed him. This lack of cohesion among Russia's elite was very telling. They, too, believed he could succeed. Putin's silence during the initial chaos didn't help either. It pointed to a man who had been caught flat-footed, scrambling to regain control of the narrative. But this time, spinning the narrative proved to be a Herculean task. Why? Because Prigozhin wasn't your typical traitor. He wasn't a foreign spy or an ideological dissident. He was a key player in Putin's own game. Plus, he was exceptionally popular among segments of the Russian public. Prigozhin had cultivated a persona as a tough, no-nonsense figure, making it difficult for state media to paint him as a villain without risking backlash. That's why the Kremlin's response was so fractured. Initially, the state media downplayed the mutiny, while Telegram influencers found themselves divided, some even siding with Prigozhin. By the time the dust settled and the mutiny was over, the Kremlin was left with a public that was bewildered, confused, and skeptical of its propaganda efforts. Even a month after the rebellion, the Kremlin still struggled to unify its messaging. In a desperate bid, state broadcasters linked the mutiny to Western plots, attempting to pivot the narrative back to the age-old theme of external enemies. But this strategy wasn't the most effective. Reports indicated that as many as 73% of Russians were still confused about the events, undermining the Kremlin's propaganda machine. In the wake of the rebellion, Prigozhin and his Wagner forces were sent to Belarus, but the damage had been done. Internal fractures began to emerge as his followers, emboldened by the rebellion, expressed discontent with Putin's handling of the situation. In August 2023, just 2 months after the uprising, Prigozhin died in a plane crash. Naturally, this led to widespread speculation about the circumstances surrounding his death. Only 27% of Russians accepted the official explanation, indicating a significant disconnect between the state narrative and public perception, according to a poll carried out by the survey group Russian Field on behalf of state news outlet RTVI. This dissent clearly highlighted a growing skepticism toward the Kremlin and its attempts to manipulate information. It also brought forward an important question. If Prigozhin could rally support against the Kremlin, what might happen next? The stage has seemingly been set for continued unrest in a country that's now acutely aware of its leader's fragility. And Putin? How has he been dealing with the escalating pressures and public criticism? Not with strength, but with desperation. As the walls close in, Russia's leader has resorted to increasingly erratic measures, lashing out like a cornered animal. That's not to mention one bluff after another. But here's the thing, Putin knows his bluffs might not deter Western support for Ukraine, yet he clings to them like a lifeline. Why? Because they buy him time he desperately needs to maintain his grip on power, even if it's just for another month or another year. The irony is rich. In trying to assert his dominance on the global stage, he exposes his vulnerability domestically. Each threatening maneuver underscores his inability to govern effectively, revealing a leader scrambling to project strength while increasingly losing it at home. And the Russian people are starting to catch on. The question remains, how much longer can Putin maintain this illusion of control before it all comes crashing down? And will it be his own people who bring about his day of reckoning? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Now go and check out why Russia is on the brink of civil war, or click this other video instead.